Whoever can give the best colloquium today wins. No, but everybody gets to try.
Oh, everybody has to try?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll get going here. Thanks, folks, for coming. Definitely on this sunny afternoon when you could be outside in February enjoying the sun. How that works out, I don't know. Playing disc golf, perhaps, or whatever it is. So thanks for showing up. Sure appreciate it. I want to let you know about our next one. Coming up February 26th, Laura Gow will be talking about Moving Towards Inclusion, a discussion of technology issues faced by visually impaired students. So that'll be interesting. But today we have Mike Sell. Mike Sell is a Detroit native, survived, made it out. Congratulations.
I was. The bio says I was born in Detroit.
Born in Detroit.
Which is true. I didn't
Where are
grow
you
up in
native to?
Detroit. What?
Where are you native
St.
to?
Clair, Michigan.
St. Clair, Michigan. It's very different.
The burbs.
The burbs. So Mike is born in Detroit, native to St. Clair. He holds a BFA in studio art from Adrian College and an MFA in photography from Kendall College of Art and Design in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Mike has presented at conferences in the Midwest and Pacific Northwest on topics ranging from his art practice to internet memes. Mike's a member of the Society for Photographic Education and a Popular Culture Association. His research interests includes investigations in memetics, which is what exactly?
That was my other colloquium. You missed it. It was like 3 years ago.
It's been a while. Before my time. The dialogue, analog, aesthetic, and media-centric constructed imagery. Mike's work has been featured in exhibitions throughout Michigan, Oregon, selected shows in Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, and Estonia. Mike came to EOU in about 2009, is currently assistant professor of arts and media communication. Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Sell.
Thanks, Rory. Gabe, are we good? Sound okay? Okay, because I'm not going to adjust. I'm going to use my teacher voice. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. This is probably a better turnout than first colloquium when I was a youngin' and it was my first year and nobody knew who I was. Thanks to the colloquium committee putting everything together, to the EOU Foundation, and to the Oregon Arts Commission for their support of this work that I'm going to get into talking about eventually. When I was putting together images to begin, get a rough framework of what I wanted to talk about, I noticed that there was one element that kind of ran through almost my entire body of work. And I thought, I was thinking where that came from. And so I wanted to start today by talking about pretending. I've been pretending about various things for as long as I can remember. But the real pretending began far, far away in the suburbs in St. Clair, Michigan, at St. Clair Middle School. For those of you who aren't familiar, when you're from Michigan, you can point to your hand. That's where I'm from. That's a meme, actually. The cultural element of people in Michigan pointing to their hand to show where they live, that's passed by word of mouth, by imitation. That's a meme. That's an example of a meme, actually. That's a bonus for you. I didn't plan. You hate that one. Sorry. We can do the Upper Peninsula too for those of you who aren't familiar. Anyway, at St. Clair Middle School, which that building is no longer St. Clair Middle School, I was part of a fictional rock band. A friend of mine and I came up with the idea to pretend that we were musicians. Why learn how to play instruments? Why learn all of those tricky things like melody and chord progression and all that stuff when you could just pretend and make the visual component of music, which involved compact discs. I used to use the AOL trial CDs that came in the mail. I would paint them. That's what became the music. Everything that we created consisted of supporting materials that went along with sustaining a band. The CDs, T-shirts, posters, you name it. If it pertained to music and wasn't the actual music making part, that's what we made. As the work connected with the band evolved, the emotional content of the work. Why are people laughing? The emotional content of the work grew. I was a teenager after all, and there was an imagined theatricality to the entire thing. It was sort of some kids keep diaries, some kids do pass notes back and forth. I made fake CDs and posters. So every art project, basically, that I made in middle school and then into high school revolved around this junk that I still keep for this very reason, probably. I never intended the work to be considered art because no one else cared about it. It wasn't for anyone else, it was for myself. And these things were never displayed. They were just occasionally traded hands between the people involved, me and my one friend, and then eventually, after about a year, really just myself. And it kind of went through, he was quality control, and I was the everything else. And he was like, I like that, let's do that, okay. The music background that I established for myself in middle school led to my involvement as a pretend documentary filmmaker for friends, this time in high school, who were in a real band. The ideology behind their band was somewhat fictional, as they played only cover songs and pretended to be important because they were in a band, which is how most people act when they're in high school. But the making music part was real, and so I used my parents' mini VHS camera and filmed the narrative scenes in sepia because it was artistic, and then filmed the actual concert footage in color, kind of as a homage to Wizard of Oz, if you will. The movies drew from the mockumentary style of This Is Spinal Tap, which we all probably saw the first time when we were 15. This is a scene. This is a still image from the second movie. The first movie involved all of us like speaking as though we were British because that's what you did, and that's what Spinal Tap did. So that's what we did. And Christopher Guest films like Best in Show and Waiting for Guffman. Everyone, unlike the band stuff that I was doing in middle school, everyone was involved in this because it was a public performance, and everyone was pretending in one way or another, mostly because they had a video camera pointed at them. It wasn't only the band who performed for the camera, the audience, who were really just our friends, did as well. It was the first time that I ever noticed that people changed in front of cameras. There weren't any cell phones back then, and there was no Facebook or selfies, and it certainly wasn't a new concept of being a high schooler to present yourself in that way. But I hadn't really noticed that when you turned a camera on to someone, they changed. They either reverted into they pulled back into their shell, or they changed in some way. They were either bigger or smaller, based on, I don't know. Flash forward through the rest of high school, because why should we talk about that? College, Adrian College, go Bulldogs. An art major that also had plenty of pretending. A couple of bad haircuts, that's me right there. And then I was getting ready today, and I noticed that it doesn't really look that different from back then. So I don't know what that means. And eventually you find me in graduate school creating one big 18-month-long pretend project revolving around a fictional presidential candidate. John Hubbard's campaign was situated within the narrative of the actual 2008 presidential election, and the small-time third-party candidate had his own website, there it is, campaign speeches on YouTube channel, and a campaign and rally staff. It was one big photographic media performance art kind of blitz on our entire campus and the town, which was Grand Rapids. The culmination of the Hubbard image was my thesis exhibition for my MFA, and the gallery took on the look of a historical or cultural museum because of the presentation. Everything was couched within this fictional reality where the images were photographed by other people, my images with fake names, and articles written by other people, my writing with fake names. Even the exhibition, I already said that. The exhibition was pretend, and there was in the middle there was this vitrine case of the memorabilia from the campaign to give it this historical context. I was addressing the actual presidential election since it was really happening, and the speeches and the media involved talking about the real candidates, but also the fictional elements that emerge from the 24-hour news coverage of every event. The media fascination with politics and the public's fascination with the media made the subject an ideal target for exploration. While the work was critical of mass media and the political process, it also had a human element to it as well. John Hubbard was an all too familiar, yet rather invisible voice, that of the underrepresented third party, the ideologue, the person news networks ignore in favor of that binary two-party political system and news cycle. And the funny thing was that this was meant to sort of call attention to the idea that anyone can be president, but not really anyone can be president, And then, so we had all these discussions about the like status quo and everything. And then on the actual ballot in November was a black man on one side and for vice president, a woman on the other side. So it was ironic, I guess, that the face here was the familiar face when in reality it was the underrepresented face. The work here encompassed an element that continues to pervade all of my current work in some way, that of fictionalized reality. Everything in the project drew upon my growing interest in the writings of Jean Baudrillard and Michel Foucault, the role of simulation in mass media, and the political process, which, if you really boil that theory down to its barest essentials, and then maybe boil it down a little bit, it's kind of like pretending, and getting audiences to question the veracity of art and the media in general. The Hubbard Project helped me land a job, a real job, not a pretend job, at Eastern. I moved here in 2009, 2,000 miles from home, and it was a while before I found my bearings and began making work that was both meaningful and intentional. I started with a series of portraits that were based on internet personas. This is the work that was actually just about to begin the last time I gave a colloquium, so it was fun to examine this in this sort of full circle way. I traveled the country and met with and photographed people that I knew only in online form. To me, they existed only as online personalities, and I contacted the ones that I could get in contact with, and that's who I visited when I was able to get out around in the country. The work explored ideas of fictional personalities and how individuals can behave one way in online mode and another way in reality. The portraits were intimate but distant at the same time, and that dichotomy of being familiar and unfamiliar is what still fascinates me kind of a little bit to this day. And they investigated the now ubiquitous dichotomy of constructed personality present in online social interactions, whether people modify their personality for business email versus personal email, for an Instagram account versus a Facebook account, or in some online discussion forum, depending on the topic involved. After all the time spent organizing this trip, 25 different locations from Kentucky to Michigan to Philadelphia to Seattle, and working out the logistics with the subjects. It was a project that was bigger than anything that I had done before, logistically anyway. Developing film and creating all of the imagery, I needed a break from something so structured and streamlined, I guess, if you will. I turned my attention and my camera out onto the area around me, and I began exploring the place where I lived. It was sort of a slight resignation on my part, like, I guess this is my hometown. I guess I'm not a Michigander anymore, even though I still occasionally say college or other words that people think sound funny. I don't know. Corey's from Michigan too, but I don't think we sound funny. I know, exactly. Where I am now with my photographic work started with this image of a ball field, which is back behind Island City School. I thought the way that the light splashed across the grass was both quiet and beautiful, and the ambiance contrasted with the deteriorated board on the backstop, which is attached to the fence behind the baseball field, worn through from so many games or from BB guns or who knows what. The content of the image told a story, and I wasn't relying this time on a fake news headline or a Rolling Stone cover, a fake Rolling Stone cover, that wasn't a real Rolling Stone cover, to convey the narrative that I was just sort of starting to explore, since I still didn't know what it was. I found myself examining the area in and around LeGrand with a more thoughtful and critical eye. Odd scenes emerged, revealing a city that felt unique, individualistic, and special. It helped me feel more at home to have images of LeGrand that were interesting to me, but how those images fit into any sort of larger picture project still eluded me. I still had no idea where this was going. And so it was uncomfortable, but I thought that there was an interesting link between feeling uncomfortable in a new region of the country and working in a new way to discover whatever I was going to end up discovering. I was completely out of my element, but I just kept shooting. There was an occasional poignant image, such as this one, of crushed roses in a driveway, which is actually right across the street from where Rob lives, whether you know it or not. Not far down the road from my house either. But as I looked through the images, and I didn't realize this at the time, but I did when I started putting the slides together. And some of these some of these images aren't final edited images because they were negatives that either didn't turn out as well as I would like. I'm developing all this film myself, and the chemistry is really finicky. It's a really big learning curve when you don't have a $15,000 automated machine. So some of them are unedited because I'm not using them, but they're still good examples and they show up okay in this resolution. I sound like my students making excuses about why my work doesn't look right. Anyway, as I was looking through the images, and this is not anything conceptual, it just was how I was, I don't know, composing or looking through images. They were all glorified rectangles. Walls, buildings, this is a gravestone, essentially, commemorating where there was a flour mill that exploded. What's that? A building marker, thank you. That's the terminology I was looking for. I was fascinated with these play walls on playgrounds that I don't know if we don't have those in Michigan or if they're a new thing since I left, like grade school, but they're walls so that you can play with like a ball or something by yourself, I think, that you can bounce it and throw it. That symbol of like not having anyone to play with on the playground, I thought was really interesting, and it kind of matched my emotional state when I moved here because I didn't know anybody. This wasn't one of those play walls, but it was another rectangle behind the high school, and the middle school has a play wall as well. I don't know if that's what that's called either. There probably is a better nomenclature for play walls. I don't know. But that makes it sound fun, so let's just call them that. If it was rectangular, though, I had images of it. Maybe it's because film is a rectangle. Maybe that had something to do with it, or maybe it was just because I liked the symmetry and I liked bringing order to this idea of this new place. This image now seems really old from when this is now the yogurt place, and someone spray paint. I don't know the context of this. I thought it was interesting, though, that someone wrote the word lies on this building. Okay, so then two things happened that changed the course of the project, or actually turned the initially vague idea into something a little bit more specific. Since I was photographing the landscape, I realized, that I could travel with my camera and try to bring outside images outside of LeGrand into the context of this project, for whatever reason. I didn't know what it was at first. So I took my camera and my film wherever I went, shooting in Portland, that's where this image is, or was taken, John Day, Pendleton, Prairie City, wherever, bringing back images that struck me in ways that were similar to those that I had shot in LeGrand. I was looking just for something interesting or just a bit different. Roland Barthes calls this element of photography the punctum, a fancy word for something that strikes the viewer in a way that can't really be explained. That's what I was gunning for, and it felt like defining that exact thing was still eluding me. But by shooting in other locations and then comparing the resulting images to what I already had, the singularity of where I lived began to fade, and the images began to form a collection. They started to become a portrait of anywhere. Considered together, these disparate places seemed united through the camera lens. They were one place, essentially. They were my experience, which was in a way singular, but they also started to look like similar locations or like from one larger area. And I don't mean that they looked like Earth, which is one big place, and that's where I shot the images, so they all kind of fit together. But instead, the group of photos started to feel like a city or town that existed somewhere. The second thing that happened was actually a little bit earlier in the project, but I didn't want to talk about it first because it wouldn't have made sense, and only because I didn't put two and two together until much later on. I didn't realize that it was really that meaningful at the time. The very first place that I photographed in LeGrand was the dumpsters behind the Observer building, mostly because I thought it was really funny and sad and poignant that there were these large dumpsters that said news. And that's what gets thrown in there. Your coffee cups go in a different dumpster. Newspapers go in the one dumpster that says news. I went into the office, chatted with the people in the office to make sure that I had permission to photograph. They were thoroughly confused. Why does someone want to take photos of our dumpsters? And because I didn't really know the exact reason, except that I was just sort of compelled to, they just accepted it. They were like, okay, can we see the results? Sure, I'll email you the results. Meeting with the Observer staff to get their permission was the first time I photographed in LeGrand using my 4x5 camera. So these images come from a large 4x5 negative. I'd only seen one dumpster initially, and I didn't know there were actually three, so that was kind of a pleasant surprise. The symbology of the triptych, the pure white structures that symbolize destruction, the two dumpsters with eyes that kind of stare back at you, the monolith, the trash, the end result, the recycling, the circle of life, kind of. The rectangle, again, more rectangles. But these dumpsters were one symbolic element that threw the idea of LeGrand as unique and special right out of the window. I don't mean to say that where we are isn't a special place. It's definitely worth living here, and there are things here that you can't find anywhere else. But the epiphany that I had was that these dumpsters, or in the end, this middle one, because I found that one, the framing of the wall behind it, more interesting, connected us, LeGrand and the Observer, to so many other cities across the country. In the last decade, we've seen newspaper after newspaper struggle with print subscriptions, declining advertising revenue, increased printing costs, ambiguous relationships between readers and internet content, et cetera, et cetera. And this is happening and has happened already pretty much everywhere. Seattle, St. Louis, Miami, and LeGrand was no exception. I didn't know it at the time because I wasn't a subscriber to the Observer, but almost at the exact time I was photographing the dumpsters was when the Observer switched to its current 3-day-a-week delivery format. Just a kind of a funny coincidence. This dumpster then took on almost mythical appearances as I processed the image and blew it up to make larger prints. All the images that I had were exploring place and location, and now the divide between I didn't practice saying these words, homogeneity and heterogeneity. Examples of a shrinking world where selective images from Portland could blend with photographs from Pendleton and LeGrand. Everything was sort of coalescing into one place. I was again creating a fiction without fully intending to do so at the start. This is sort of inherent in the medium of photography, and I cover these concepts with students here on campus that photographing something conveys importance, and when you convey importance to lots of things, they sort of start to blend together. But in this body of images, I didn't even recognize that I was doing it on my own. That notion had me looking at other places online, looking at ways to photograph other places that I hadn't originally thought, such as Google and its omnipresent Street View. I found myself exploring places on Google Maps using their Street View feature, and the accessibility and the lack of ambiguity in Street View became an important catalyst for the project. When I first arrived, and so did the symbols, the idea of like the permanence of a pin going into a map, and you are here, this is where you are. And now our phones tell us where we are and where everybody else is. And one thing that I knew from moving here and in telling people like where I was, since everyone thought I had moved to Oregon, which equaled Portland, and that there were other places, when I first arrived, I was on Google Maps, on Street View, looking for the street images, and I couldn't get a view of where I was living because the coverage of the town was very limited. It only comprised all of Adams Avenue, most of 6th, 4th, and 2nd Streets. That was it in 2009. Now, this was taken from the screen yesterday, the roads that are blue have availability of Google Street View. And I have yet to meet someone who has seen the Google car. Has anybody seen the Google car? How do they do that? It's the daytime. It's so weird. It's so strange. It's so strange. And this happened in only 4 years to cover nearly the entire town, including where I used to live, even though I don't live there anymore. I had been shooting all of these images, then the landscape, for more than a year when I was contacted by someone I had met at a conference in Washington, D.C. in 2013. I met Stacy Kuzel, a PhD candidate and curator from Canada, now living in Estonia, following a talk I gave in D.C. The talk had been about my internet personality portraits, and the work interested her and related to her doctoral work in media theory and personality. Now, months later, in the timeline, she was organizing an exhibition to be mounted in Estonia. Her curatorial statement focused on the idea of the homunculus. I had never heard the term before, so I had to begin researching because I was going to be part of the show where the theme related to this idea that I didn't know about. The homunculus is an old concept related to alchemy and preformationism, which is the idea that organisms develop from miniature versions of themselves. Like the sperm and egg to make people are really just like little teeny tiny people, and then they just grow into big people. The idea of the homunculus is present in Faust, in part 2 of Faust, for the English people in the audience. And the idea that we were focusing on as visual artists, or at least what I was focusing on because I connected to it, it made the most sense to me, was the idea of the homunculus as the person that lives inside of your brain. And your eyeballs project what you see, and then that little person sees and interprets the brain as a person, basically, is the little homunculus inside of your head. But then that brings in it introduces the idea, the logical fallacy of the homunculus, which is, well, if there's a little person in your head, then what's in the head of the little person? And it just goes on and on and on and on and on, which is interesting to look at and both interesting to think about. Initially, Ms. Kuzel, the curator, was thinking that my portrait work from the other project would be perfect for the show, as her main theme compared the idea of the homunculus to the creation of artificial life, and my photos represented the creation of artificial behavior or personalities. The way these landscape images were evolving, however, fit the homunculus idea of the little man perfectly, right down to the, oops, I skipped a slide, right down to the little man that you click and drag and place in Google Maps in order to see the street view. So I had the homunculus in my research that I was doing. Plus, as an artist, I wasn't too keen on my first international exposure consisting of images that were 3 or 4 years old. The project now revolved around this fictional town. I had come to the conclusion that I should just sort of bring in a place and make the images exist in this fictional landscape, because I couldn't get away from this pretending that I had always done and the fictional reality. And so this is where I started. This is a map of Pressley, Montana, which is the name that I can't remember where it came from, so I'll just say it was arbitrarily selected. Maybe I listened to Elvis that day, I can't remember. I made this map in Illustrator in order to start to get my bearings of where are these different landmarks. Where is the news dumpster? Where is the flour mill building marker? And where is this play wall and that play wall, etc. The idea for Pressley came about during an early brainstorming studio session in the fall of 2013, and I had actually forgotten that I had done this. I wrote an elaborate narrative about how I found out about Pressley, Montana. So I was filling in this entire backstory, and it was this story about a trip that I had made to Michigan, which was true, after I had already moved to LeGrand. A friend, a real friend, in Michigan had attended school in Montana, a real school, and my stories about LeGrand, the real stories I was telling, reminded him of a town near Missoula, Pressley, a pretend town. And one of his former professors, a pretend professor, had established an artist residency, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I spent a summer in Pressley, and that's how the story fit with the images. And those were the images that I was bringing back, even though I was taking them in town. Pressley began to feel quite a bit like the Hubbard work from years before. I was creating this backstory, and then that would then inform the images, and vice versa. Some parts were real, like the state of Montana, which is real. I know because I've driven across the whole thing. And my friend, but the zip code, the street names, the residency, the residence, everything was fictionalized. Identifying the images within a fictional town gave me the flexibility to include whatever I wanted as photographic subjects, provided the subjects could logically exist in the same general area. Does Pressley have skyscrapers? Not yet, but it could. I just haven't gotten to that part because I've started here. The city could then evolve the way a character evolves in a story, and that was really interesting to me. The city was then a character with its own little narrative. The final iteration of the Pressley images, I should say final now, because who knows, they could change later, came about following the exploration of Google Maps Street View and the idea of the homunculus. I created a map in conjunction with the images and placed the images in the scenes. And to emphasize the Anytown USA concept, I incorporated Google Street View by adding the little man to the maps and then superimposing the graphics onto the images. And it's similar to what I did with the media imagery from the Hubbard project, where if it was a Newsweek story, if it meant to resemble a Newsweek story, I would take actual Newsweek and recreate graphics and page layouts and borders and getting the typeface right for page numbers and articles, etc. So this was along those same lines, a sort of imitation in order to come across as real. Each image then is stretched or skewed to emulate the camera that Google uses on its Street View cars, and there it is. And you can look up where it is. Like you can say, where you can find out where they're traveling and photographing, which I didn't know you could do. So here are some new images, or newer, that are finalized, and then you can see in the lower left, the corner shows the map where you are, from where you are, the vantage point from which you are viewing the scene itself. Here's one that was taken on campus. The images then finally made, oh, there's one more. The images finally made their way to Tallinn, Estonia, the capital, in August of last year. I was invited to speak at the gallery opening, so I made the trip as well. Tallinn is kind of like two smaller cities with an industrialized, modern city center, which is not pictured in this. Oh, it's in the. You can catch it in the lower right-hand corner. And the Old Town, which is what we're looking at here, with all those tile roofs, which was built mostly during the 15 and 1600s. The exhibition featured work by other European artists, every work interpreting the idea of the homunculus in a different way. This is an image from outside the gallery. The Hopus Bia Gallery, located in the heart of Old Town, sits on a block littered with different gallery spaces. And so their opening was very similar to our First Friday openings, where the Nightingale will show work, the Art Center will open a show, Potter's House, etc., and people can go back and forth when the weather is like this, not when it's cold. Other artists in the show included Sten Sartis, who is a video installation artist who had this piece which had this monitor on the floor of a looped video of his hand dropping a light bulb into icy waters. And I got to meet all of the artists as well. And so it was a really welcoming experience, which was really good because sort of like moving from Michigan to Oregon, going from Oregon to Estonia on my own was kind of similar. And other people who've traveled to Europe before probably know that, and they're like, that's traveling, dude, that's how it goes. But I hadn't ever been to Europe before. Hekla from Iceland also spoke at the opening and gave some background into her piece here, the English title of which is Your Heart. It's a musical interactive piece, and viewers are encouraged to email the artist songs that are love songs, and she uploads them to the hard drive connected to the piece, and they loop and play at the same time. But there's all of those little blue things are speakers, like little speakers. So it's like 8 different songs playing all at once, and it continuously loops through. But they're all about love, and it's kind of shaped like a heart, and they glow in neon, which was interesting. Laura Kusk was the other photographer in the show, and she had created this display that sat by the door, which I found really fascinating because I didn't know that this was part of the exhibition until the day before the opening, and then I met Laura at the opening, and I gushed over her presentation and everything. They were postcards that you could take, and the still lifes on the postcards are meant to be gift ideas, that if it's Valentine's Day on Saturday and you don't know what to get someone, get them a beach ball inside of a colander, and that's the solution. Camille's piece was an installation that involved hundreds of these tiny clay figurines. So his work was the most visually similar to mine in the context of the concept of the show, in that they were actually little people. But they were created during the riots in London in, was it 2011 or 10? I can't remember. But they coincided with that, and so it's this huge mass of people marching toward whatever they're upset about. And then there was my work. There was a bustling in the streets during the opening, viewers out and about to catch work in several different spaces. The artist talk that happened the night of the opening was a packed room, 65 people out of blue. No idea where they came from. It really blew me away. And the arts community in Tallinn is rounded out by small residencies, independent gallery spaces, the Estonia Academy of Art, who helped fund the artists visiting to install their work, and a cutting-edge contemporary museum. The response to the Homunculus collection, which was the name of the exhibition that I was in, was overwhelmingly positive, and the night of the opening reminded me very much, like I said, of the first Friday art walks here in La Grande. In fact, much of the sentiment around the art in Tallinn was similar to how the arts community works in La Grande, I thought. The arts in Tallinn are independent and individualized because Tallinn itself primarily runs on the shipping industry and the tourism industry. It's a very sought after. There were tour groups going 24/7, all languages, which was really fascinating. There, though, there's this spark of intensity within the relatively normal workings of a large European city. It is the capital, after all. Here, I think those of us involved in the arts understand that individualism and that spark. Oh, that's where we are, right there. It's kind of a map, so I like pointing it out. And it's what keeps us around and drives us to create new work. The Contemporary Museum in Estonia and the Arts Academy itself, despite reduced funding, continue to thrive in a way that's not entirely different from the arts at Eastern and in the community as well. So what began, and there we are, that's us in the Art Center. So what began as an investigation into a fictionalized reality, a pretend location that was meant to mimic many locations throughout the country, had sort of come full circle and turned into something else, at least in my mind. With my trip to Tallinn, I was able to see a small arts community as an outsider, and it made me come back to the individual elements that make communities unique. What had started out as an exploration of a pretend place and the similarities of most American towns made me appreciate and understand the special things about La Grande, even if I occasionally refer to our city by a fictional name. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? That's okay. Nancy?
I was really interested in that. I love hearing the trajectory of that development of the fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm interested particularly in this most recent exhibition and sort of vision for town spaces as, in a sense, sort of geometric and framed in sort of a Google way.
Uh-huh.
But it didn't appear to be people in your town in the same way that, that earlier, in your earlier fictions, you were kind of people by characters.
Mm-hmm.
Engaging in tasks and so forth. So I guess my question is, do you have a vision for people in the fiction?
I have images. They were some of the processed but then not followed through images because I didn't like how they turned out at first and I'd have to reshoot them. Not the original idea. One of the first ideas that came out of the idea of me participating in a residency was that part of the fiction could be images of and by the artists that I had met in Montana, and I really like that idea. And I was in the middle of developing like 4 artists so that an exhibition of work like this could be, here's what the town in Montana looks like, and then here are portraits I took of these 4 artists, and then here's examples of their photographic work, making it all photography based to kind of link it together. And then I stumbled upon a TED Talk, of all things, of an artist whose name I forget because it made me really mad when I saw it. And he made up his own biennial with 100 artists and 100 different pieces of work. And it started this long discussion between a friend of mine and me about how you get an idea, and if you don't act fast enough on it, you eventually discover that someone else has already done it. So I do have some images like that, but it would require sort of ignoring that I know that this guy did this other thing, which is really fascinating, and just run with it and see where their work takes me. But then I run the risk, I guess eventually, unless I'm just overthinking it, of then beginning to just sort of make work under these pseudonyms, and that's not exactly how I wanted to operate either. Or maybe I do, and I just don't know it yet. But now this has given me a chance, showing in Europe, and then sort of bringing it all back has allowed me to kind of reconsider those ideas and go back to some rolls of black and white film that I shot that don't fit in there, and then bring in people that can become the sort of the John Hubbards of this project to be, well, you're not an artist, but it doesn't matter because this imagery will make you appear as though you are one. So there are images of people I liked the anonymity of the place fitting with the ambiguity of the place, and that meant, in my mind at least, not including people just yet. Yeah. Sure. And when you're photographing landmarks or when you're photographing landscape, especially constructed man-made landscapes, you get this, there's a sense of time because when something was built sort of dictates how it looks. And if I start incorporating people, unless I'm getting them to dress a certain way, then it's all 2010-ish. And I liked the 70s architecture with the 50s architecture with the everything else, kind of. And signage and parking lots and that kind of thing I find interesting too.
What's the population of Preston?
I don't remember. It would have to be about the size of LeGrand, maybe 15,000, maybe a little bigger, 20,000, I don't know. I know. He's looking at my map and he's like, I don't think 20,000 people can live in that space. You need more streets.
More high-rise.
More high-rises, yeah. And I didn't show the water in the Presley map matches a stretch of highway that runs directly south out of Missoula. And so there's like a void between two small towns and I thought, that's where it'll go. And then I kind of looked at the Google satellite imagery to make sure, like, is this just mountains and that's why nobody's there? And it was just, there's 40 miles, and so halfway in between is where that kind of fits. Yeah. And you could, that's a different discussion, yeah. No? All right, thanks everybody. I appreciate it. If you have questions, you can email me. I'm on. It's all Google.
I didn't have a question, but I had a flash about a homunculus.
Oh, yeah?
Do you remember Woody Allen?